my most recent project here, I recently got this Kaypro 4. This is the Kaypro 483 model from 1983. I figured I'd share some of the repairs and some maintenance I've been doing to it. Now, when I got this, it didn't come with any software. I didn't have any discs, and with the only input on this being the two 5 1/4 floppy drives, there's no hard drive on here. I couldn't do anything with it other than just turn it on and see the message that says insert disk. So what I decided to do was install a GoTech drive with flash floppy on. I downloaded some images and was able to get it to boot. But then I noticed a few problems along the way, and I'll make some videos here and show you some fixes I've done. Now, one of the first problems I had with it, as soon as I got it to boot, is I noticed the keyboard wasn't working. And you can hear the little beep sound that it's making coming from the speaker right here. So it would make that beep sound, but nothing was showing up on the screen. I checked obvious things, like the keyboard cable. This is the OEM cable. Thought maybe that wasn't working quite right, but I checked continuity between the keyboard connector and the connector on the motherboard, and everything seemed fine. But just to rule that out, I decided to try some other cables. I had some phone cords, which I've read don't work. But even upon hooking those up, I had good continuity and low resistance coming through, but I was still getting the same problem. Beeps on the keyboard, but nothing on the screen. So to help me figure out this keyboard problem I was having, I did a little research on the internet, and I found Terry Stewart's blog page about a very similar keyboard problem. I found this very helpful. It gave me a great starting point as to things that I should check. So I'll link this into the description. If anyone's curious about using the GoTech with the flash floppy firmware on it, I'll also post a link to this project. This is very useful for older computers that you don't have any floppy disks for, and you don't have another way to interface with it. I will also post a link for this Kaypro technical manual, which is where I got this from. So this here on the right hand side, here's the U78 baud rate generator and the U70 SIO chip. All the way on the right here is the keyboard connector, so the signal comes in to the SIO chip down here, and these two chips work together to create the keyboard signal. So let's take a look at that. So after looking at the circuit diagrams for this, and I got the case cover taken off, this here is the baud rate generator chip, and this is the SIO chip, and this back here is where the keyboard connector comes into the back of the motherboard. Again, I checked between here and the socket on the back of the keyboard, and I was getting great continuity with low resistance, but I was still having that problem. And after doing some reading online, figured out that it was probably something to do with either this baud rate generator or this SIO chip right here. I recently got myself one of these circuit testers, so I figured instead of just throwing parts at it, I'd try to do a little testing based on the circuit diagram. But this is actually the first time I got to use this new tool. So here's what I found. So the first thing I did was I checked the TX pin on the baud rate generator to see if there's a signal, and indeed there was. So I wasn't thinking that the baud rate generator was the problem. So the next thing I checked was the keyboard in on the SIO chip to see if I was getting a signal coming in from the keyboard. So I got steady signal there, but you'll see when I push a key on the keyboard, it interrupts the signal. So that means it's getting input from the keyboard. So after that, what I checked was the signal going back out from the SIO chip, which would be this pin here. And I am getting it on this chip. On the original chip, when I checked that signal out from SIO going to the keyboard, I wasn't getting anything. My plan was to put the old chip back in. I actually did put the old chip back in so I could show you that there was no signal on it, but somehow, miraculously, the old chip started working again. I did reseat the chip several times before I went ahead and bought a new one, and I was still getting the same problem. So either way, it was a bad connection, or the chip itself was bad and works intermittently. But now I've got a brand new SIO chip in here, and that seemed to do the trick. All right, new chips installed, signals look good, and now I can type on the keyboard. I was very excited to get that to work. So now I've got keyboard input. The next thing I did was I went ahead and just started going through and pushing each key on the keyboard. And unfortunately, fortunately, most of the keys worked. Some I had to press hard, some were a little sticky, and some didn't work at all, like this 9 key here. Doesn't seem to be doing anything. So I decided to take a closer look at that. So for some of the keys that didn't seem to be working too well, I'd have to push them multiple times or push them kind of hard. I actually just pulled the keycap off, and then around the plunger here, I sprayed a little bit of contact cleaner, and then I just worked the contact cleaner in. And I did this with a handful of them, and that actually did the trick. Some of them were still a little sticky. I pulled the keycap off and hit them again. But no matter what I did to this number 9 key over here, it just would not work at all. So I'm thinking there's something wrong with the switch. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this up on the bench and take the switch out. So I've got the keyboard taken out of the case. I got it up here on my bench, and I'm gonna work on pulling that number 9 switch out. See if I can replace it. It was very graciously donated some spare parts, so I actually have a known good working switch that I'm gonna swap it out with. Let me get my trusty desoldering pump here. Make sure I get enough solder out of there so it'll pop right out from the other side. That one didn't quite go. Okay. Make sure that these tabs both feel loose. Straighten them out a little. Okay, gently, hopefully. Oh, maybe not quite so gently. Let me get a smaller set of pliers. All right, just a reminder, be careful of brittle plastics. I tried to gently pry up with some needle nose. I really wasn't pushing very hard at all. And it started to break the edges of the switch. That's how I got the one out of the donor board. And I've actually replaced this one already without any issues. That one popped right out. But anyways, I actually just used a couple of screwdrivers, one to push the tab over and another one to lift the edge up. So I was able to get this switch to pop out. So now we can work on getting the replacement put in. I should mention that some of the older Kaypro keyboards don't have these separate switches like this. They have a foam and foil type setup. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to fix some problems with your Kaypro keyboard. There are other tutorials online of how people have repaired those. I actually haven't had one of those yet to do any repairs on. But to get this new keycap in here, we just make sure we line things up. Get it snapped right down in there. And before I put this switch in, I did take a continuity tester on both of the pins of the switch, and I just, made sure that I was getting continuity when I pushed down on this. So now we can solder. The switch has already been snapped in place, so I'm not too worried about having to hold it in place while I get the solder put on. And there we have it. I'll just put the final touch on there. There. Good as new. So if you don't have replacement keycaps and you've got one of these that's not working quite right, it might be possible, since you can actually pop these open pretty easily. There's just these two tabs on the outsides that you bend open, and then the bottom slides right off. So you've got a plunger in there that pushes down on the spring, or the spring holds a tension on it, but it pushes these two pieces of metal together right here. Let's see if we can get that better picture of that. So it's possible you might be able to play around with getting these bent back into position and check continuity, make sure it's nothing broken. So that way, if you've got some keys that aren't working that the contact cleaner spray is not going to fix, you could try popping them out and possibly just bend something back into place to get it to work again. And the moment of truth. All right. Perfect. Here's the power supply from the Kaypro 4, and I wanted to show you getting the Rifa caps replaced. So if you're not familiar with a Rifa cap, there are these little guys here, and it says Rifa on it. They're also called paper caps, or paper capacitors. And computers from this area, like the Kaypro, the Osborne, the Apple II, these are just a time bomb waiting to go off. If you've never had a Rifa Cap go off, it's kind of like setting off a model rocket inside your house. It instantly fills the entire house with smoke. I did have one do that on my Osborne 1 computer, and luckily it didn't cause any damage. Just caused a little bit of alarm and having to open all the windows up. So this power supply right here from the Kaypro 4, I've noticed that it's got 3 of these Rifa Caps in it. So before I do too much with the Kaypro, I want to replace these first because I've experienced a Rifa Cap and I don't want to do it again. So yeah, there's this one here, and the modern replacement is actually quite small. And I've got a couple more for these 2 over here. Now the way I like to get these off of here is this little guy here, which I've actually already got it turned on. So let me show you real quick how we do this. I'll turn my fan on. Let's find where this guy is here. So this is a solder sucker with a hot iron built in, which is kind of nice. It makes things easy. You can do this with just a regular soldering iron. Just kind of heat up the solder and pull it off as you go. But I just kind of put it over the end, give it a little wiggle, and pull the solder right off of it. I do have a fan going over here next to me. Make sure that I don't get any fumes in my face. Sometimes it takes a couple of goes to get enough solder off to loosen it up. Now once I get most of the solder out of the way, I just kind of heat the legs up a little, and then it pops out just like that. Got a little bit of excess solder here. Get that out of the way. Now that I've got these out, you can see the larger one doesn't look too bad. It looks like it's starting to get some little stress cracks in it. But one of the smaller ones actually, it's got cracks all over it. And I really do think it was going to be not much longer before this guy went up in smoke. But sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes they last quite a while before they go up. But I'm going to go ahead and get them swapped out before I have to worry about it. All right, quick disclaimer. As you can see, this says, danger, high voltage. Just be aware that, anything you're doing with computer repairs, particularly vintage computer repairs, a lot more things are out in the open, a lot of things you can touch and zap yourself. So anything you do on your own, you do at your own risk. I'd just like to, this is not an instructional video, I'm just showing you what I'm working on and how I like to go about things. Now you can see the solder sucker did a pretty good job here. These holes are pretty well cleaned out already. I just had, a couple goes on each one and got them pulled out. So it'll actually make putting the replacements in pretty quick. Just a couple quick tips on soldering. I am by no means an expert solderer, but with enough practice you can get stuff to work pretty well. So I like to use this wire wool here to clean the ends of my soldering iron off. And I think the number one thing you got to keep in mind when you're soldering is you want to heat the part you're soldering and not the solder. You don't want to stick solder, you know, on here and then stick the solder onto the part. Another thing that makes things a lot easier, especially for beginners, is to put a little bit of flux where you're soldering. It just makes the solder flow a lot easier. So I'm gonna heat up the part with the iron, get a little solder going there, and just for the heck of it, I'm gonna fill this extra hole in. There we go, that worked pretty good. Let's do this next one. There we go. 2 more to do. Might as well throw in a quick soldering safety tip. Make sure that when you're soldering, regardless of what kind of solder you're using, but especially if you're using leaded solder, make sure you've got good ventilation. I always set up a fan just off to the side of where I'm soldering to pull the fumes away from me. I didn't have it set up as well as I usually do when I'm filming this, so I will move it over a little closer for the next couple. Well, now that we got it functioning properly, let's take a look at some games.